Hello, I'm Spencer.
And I'm Brianna.
Welcome to the first episode of our 6 episode podcast.
Our goal is to teach you about Frances Joseph-Gaudet and the important things she stood for. She pioneered change in many ways in the courtroom, in the jailhouse, and in her community of New Orleans.
Each episode will have a specific focus on accomplishments important to her legacy. We hope by the end of our series, her life inspires you to make changes you want to see in your communities. Frances Joseph-Gaudet was born in Holmesville, Mississippi in 1861. As some of you know, this is the same year that the Civil War began, which would rage on for the first few years of her life. She was raised by her grandparents until she was 8. Her mother was of mixed race. Her mother's father, Squire Yancey, was a slave and a preacher for the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Her mother's mother was of Native American descent, and the woman Frances was named after. Her father was enslaved and sadly never returned home from the war. From the start, she faced generational trauma from hundreds of years of slavery her ancestors faced, along with the pillage and murder of her native ancestors on her mother's side. On top of all this, her own trauma from the beginning, spending her first few years of life in a war-torn country and losing her father. Despite all this, she talks of her deep love for her grandfather and how much she appreciates the efforts put forth raising her. She grew up extremely poor, even detailing in her autobiography how she would go barefoot all summer long just to save her shoes for the winters. Despite her harsh circumstances, generosity was a trait she picked up quickly. She even describes ripping out pages of the first book she ever had to share with her classmates, as none of them had their own books. Her grandfather assisted in building the first church for African Americans in Summit. He knew how important education was for his grandchildren's future and had the church open a school for Black children. This is where Gaudet's formal education began as a young girl. Her grandpa's focus on their education is truly beautiful due to his lack of formal education. He made sure to teach them in every way he possibly could. He would tell them the different types of bugs they would catch together. He taught them the Bible, but most important of all, how to be kind and strong-willed people. Her grandparents' love for their religion was passed on to Frances, as hearing the gospel was always a highlight of her week. When she was 8 years old, she was sent to private school and her grandparents moved to New Orleans. They would ultimately pass away in Louisiana, leaving her and her brother with their mother and her new husband. She and her brother went on to college at Straight University, a historically Black college in New Orleans. She was only able to spend a short time there due to her stepfather's death, ending her formal education in her teenage years, but her love for learning was ongoing. She would spend her spare money on literature. She loved reading and writing poetry. Her and her brother had to work to support their family, making just $10 a month, leading both of them into a deep sadness. Her brother ultimately ran away to become a chef on a freight train. He was overcome with guilt and regularly sent his mother money all the way until her death. Frances would go on to get married at the age of 17. She had 3 children and was married 10 years until her husband's alcoholism led to her petitioning for a divorce. After her divorce, she dedicated her entire life to others. She raised 3 children and carried out her mission from God, trying to cheer the brokenhearted. She was very successful in her goal, using many different means to achieve it. She quickly realized, as noble as it was to be a social justice leader, it was not very profitable. In fact, she would lose money due to her spending it in order to help others she felt needed it more. She was a seamstress by profession, but only did it to make enough money to support her modest lifestyle. The rest would be shared among those who needed succor. She became like a guardian angel to many young Black men who were incarcerated. She took responsibility for mostly young Black children arrested for petty misdemeanors, many of which were homeless. She made sure they were fed, housed, and educated. When her own home could no longer house everyone, she raised money to purchase property. In 1902, she bought over 100 acres and opened the Colored Normal and Industrial School. She worked as the principal and oversaw the entire facility, a school for children whose single mothers worked, and doubled as an orphanage for children who didn't have parents. Ultimately, Gaudet would donate the entire estate to the Episcopal Church of Louisiana. The facility briefly closed in the 1950s, but later opened the Gaudet Episcopal Home, who carried out her efforts by housing educating, and implementing Christian values for young Black children. Gaudet is recognized by the Episcopal Church as a saint, and a feast is held in her honor on the memorial of her passing, December 30th. Our primary source was Gaudet's autobiography, He Leadeth Me. The book was published in 1913. She wrote the book not to boast, but rather to inspire others to lead selfless lives as she did. She specifically wanted the book to reach Black women in hopes of encouraging positivity and spreading her faith. Throughout the novel, her honesty is very apparent as she captures her raw emotion and pain throughout her life. The novel is broken into 17 chapters. She really gives a deep dive into her life, detailing lots of her reform work and her inspirations. She talks a lot about her relationship with God. She would regularly pray, ask God for advice, and advise others to do the same. The book holds much more than just her personal work. She includes many other sources such as pictures, poems, letters, court documents, and more. Her humbleness is evident throughout the entire book. She is constantly expressing her gratitude towards others and never brags about her many accomplishments. This source was helpful for Brianna and I because it gave us her firsthand account. It was especially beneficial because she shares her own thoughts and gives the reader a really good understanding of her motivations. The book illustrates how unbelievably large her outreach was, her magnificent humility and selflessness, and how devout she was to her faith.